Welcome, 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 Catherine. I am so looking forward to this conversation. Honored and grateful that you're here. I'm really, really inspired to have the conversation that we're about to have. Catherine is in the UK, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us all about you, where you are, how you are, all the things.
Mm, yeah, thank you, Shelby. Thanks for inviting me to be here in conversation with you. It's such a pleasure. And yeah, like you said, I'm based over in the UK, in the southwest of the UK, in a really beautiful location, nestled between moorland and the sea. You guys call it the ocean, we call it the sea over here. It's a bit smaller.
Mhm.
Um, and Yeah, I mean, my work in its current iteration, because it's always evolving. I call myself a trauma resolution coach, educator, and guide. And I work with people who want to come back into their wholeness, essentially. Um, and, it's my professional work is a reflection of my own personal healing journey. Like many of us, I've gone on a big journey and learned quite a few useful things along the way. And at some point, I decided that it would be, it was my soul's calling to share what I'd learned with other people to support them to step more into their wholeness.
Mm. Yes. And you mostly work with coaches and therapists and wellness providers and folks who've done a lot of work already. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. And not always, but often they're female-bodied people. I think there's just something about my being that attracts female-bodied people to me. Um, you know, Historically, I worked in the field of sexuality. I worked as a um, sexuality coach. I worked as a sexological body worker, which involved hands on the body, hands in the body. So I've worked with a lot of women in that way over the years. And then when COVID happened, that kind of stopped all of that in person work. And I brought my work into the online arena. And yeah, it means that I can reach people further away than my little world over here, which I'm really grateful for.
Mm, wow. I'm wondering what brought you to all of this. It sounds like it was part of your soul's calling.
Mm,
If you like, you're welcome to share anything that inspired you, that or maybe it was really hard,
mm.
What brought you to this soul's calling?
Yeah. Well, I think like many of us, I grew up in a very difficult family environment. It was an abusive environment. I was born in the early 1970s here in the UK, and what we know about parenting now, we didn't know about parenting then. And so it was a very chaotic environment that I kind of spent my formative years in. And I kind of found my way through, but had a lot of really unhealthy coping strategies, substance abuse and particular behaviors that, propped me up. But I was one of those kind of high functioning people, but inside mm, I was a bit of a mess, really. And so I kind of, yeah, did really well at university and had all of this kind of academic success behind me, but I couldn't really implement that in a way that felt really meaningful for me in my life. And my relationships, my romantic relationships were really challenging. And and back in those days, like if you wanted a therapist, you had to look in the yellow pages, and some of your audience might not even know what that is, but like a big weighty kind of directory, local directory, and you'd scroll through and you'd find a therapist and you'd phone them up and you'd have to leave a message on their answer phone because this is before mobile phones were invented. And it wasn't it like healing wasn't available like it is now. It wasn't accessible. There weren't all these people who were qualified to support. And so I kind of went on this healing journey, but I was kind of met with therapists and counselors who didn't know what trauma was,
Yeah. Hmm.
right? And so, it was like this big elephant in the room that wasn't being addressed. And it felt like we were just kind of skirting around it. And I was like, well, I'm not getting any better. And there must be something wrong with me. And so I approached this like I do with most challenges, which is to go and learn as much as I possibly can about it, and then, train to be a therapist. Um, and, and took this very big kind of professional journey and did a lot of many, many, many decades actually of deep healing work. Um, and it wasn't really until I dropped into my body and started working at that level when I started to see the real shifts. And I think all the kind of talking therapy up to that point had been necessary for me to build the conceptual frameworks to kind of understand why I was feeling the way I was feeling. Um, and that gave me kind of like access into the body. And there was a lot of trauma, and it didn't feel safe to be in my body. And I had to kind of do a lot to kind of increasingly come home to my body. And of course, that journey of embodiment is a lifelong journey. I'm not at the end of it because that's only going to happen on the day in which I leave my body and I die.
Mm.
And so, for me, the kind of coming into the body moment was so pivotal. And it almost felt like, okay, this is when the real healing has started. Um, yeah. But again, that was still at a time when trauma wasn't understood in the way it is now. So it felt like I was still kind of trying to find the right people, trying to find the right support. And it was a bit hit and miss
Yeah. No.
because it felt like this part that was traumatized, it desperately wanted healing, connection, and yet coming into relationship with others, including professionals, who didn't know how to meet this system that was in a perpetual kind of flight and freeze response with occasional movements into fight. Um, and again, that was why the reason I kept kind of diving into understanding trauma, being educated, getting all the training I could to really understand, like, what is this? What is this word trauma? And how does it present in me? And how can I find a way to heal what I need to heal and find the right people to do the work that I was really longing to do?
Mm. Mm. Really stands out hearing the part where there was the talk therapy and the making sense of, and that was actually needed and helpful. And then finding the embodiment work and the connection between the trauma and the body and safety.
Mm,
And what happened once you were able to kind of begin to find healing through that avenue as well. I got goosebumps as you were
mm,
talking.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. I can resonate so much with the just wanting to learn everything about it all, both for personal healing and then bringing it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And you brought in this piece of healing in relationship. which is what we're going to kind of dive into. How do we even begin to imagine healing in relationship with a professional when our trauma has been relational? What comes up for you even when I say that?
I mean, I kind of laugh because I think about the countless discovery calls that I had, and it would just be like, not that one, not that one, not that one. It was just like, wow, am I ever going to find somebody who I can feel like they're attuned to me and they're sensitive to me, and actually, that they're running their business in a way that works for me. And kind of what I mean by that is, I remember finding someone, I thought, oh, they look great. They're going to be like the perfect person for me to work with. And then them not turning up for our first call,
Mm,
you know, and there was something wrong with their booking system. And I was just like, my attachment system just was like, no way, I
I
need to
hear
work with
you.
somebody who's like organized enough that they're going to show up when they say they're going to show up. Um, and yeah, working with a coach who then said that they'd be available between calls, on WhatsApp, and then they weren't available. And it was just like, wow, this is hard.
Mhm.
But what I discovered in that process was like getting super clear about what I need
Mhm.
and not in any way diminishing those needs and making them small, and not trying to kind of contort myself to fit the relationship that was being offered, but being so clear. It's like, this is what I need. These are what my young parts need. This is what my traumatized nervous system needs. And I'm not going to settle for anything less because it's going to be re traumatizing.
Yeah. Oh, it takes some work to be able to know what your nervous system needs and the young parts and your body, all of it.
Yeah.
That's healing in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of deep inner conversations to create that clarity.
Yeah. Oh, it's really constantly baffling to me how few practitioners understand the importance of consistency and dependability and attunement.
Mhm.
And if we had nothing else in our healing relationship, for me, those three things are absolute necessities.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I remember experiencing in some therapeutic relationships like a sense of being shamed for needing those things.
Mhm.
Like
Mm.
that I should be kind of beyond that. And it's like, well, no, because they're early developmental needs that never got met. So I'm showing up in this container for them to be met.
Yeah.
And you can't provide for that. Well, that's not making something wrong with me. It just shows me that you're not a right fit for me. Uh,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
I know that not everybody has um, that level of empowerment that comes with really knowing what you need and really valuing that information.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to gaslight ourselves. Oh, well, the therapist or the coach or the healer, they know better than me. And if they're telling me that my need for consistency is wrong, then I must be wrong.
Mm. I
And
see that
it's
happening so much. Yeah. And it's really that practitioner genuinely doesn't have their own integrated sense of self. If somebody is feeling too needy and they're contracting and they don't know how to manage that, it's not going to be a good fit.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
You're reminding me, I did the opposite as you, as I was just feverishly trying to find healers and practitioners. And instead of having discernment for what my needs were and how I needed to be held, every single person that I would meet in a consult or an introduction, I would look up at them like a young child as they were the expert and the person that was going to have all the answers and see me and save me. And I wouldn't even second guess if I could trust them. I would just give them my money and my time and throw myself fully into the thing. And the amount of money and time I have wasted being re-traumatized in that cycle is just so much. And it hasn't been until I've had regulation on board that I can create that discernment and those boundaries.
I mean, oh, trust me, I've been there as well. It was those experiences that brought me to the point where discernment could come in. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And just how painful that is, for us, but for anyone else that experiences that.
Hmm.
That desperate longing for, like, this person's going to help me. And then we have another traumatic experience in the relationship,
Hmm.
and how that can erode the sense of trust of self, but also with the other
Yeah.
and
Mm,
others in general.
absolutely.
Mhm.
What you were saying before reminds me of how I think there is a lot in the healing, the culture of healing around hyper self-reliance. You were
Mm.
talking about being gaslit by a practitioner for maybe needing more consistency or something like that. And I think part of what we wanted to talk about today is how we have to be able to heal in connection
Mhm.
instead of go to healing to figure out how to do it all by ourselves. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, kind of developmentally, I understand that there are kind of three simple sequences that we go through. And one, it's like recognize we have a need. The second is to reach out for the need. And the third is to get our need met. And so we can receive our need. And so a baby will recognize it's hungry, obviously not cognitively. The system recognizes hunger, it will cry, that's it reaching out for the need to be met. And then the caregiver comes and tends to the baby, and the baby gets to receive its needs. And, for many of us who didn't get that sequence met sufficiently enough, then we create these maladaptive patterns in ways to try and get our needs met. And one of those is to go into hyper self-reliance. Like, well, I recognized I had a need and I cried out, but nobody came. Therefore, mm, I can't trust that my needs are going to be met. And I'm just going to have to do this all by myself.
Mm.
And so, the nervous system didn't get that early co regulation imprint. So we're left like dysregulated, trying to regulate ourselves. And then that pattern kind of seeps into all of our behavior in life.
Mm.
And, it's a pattern I've had to do a lot to heal in myself, but I see it so much in other like entrepreneurs and, coaches and therapists who are all like um, these lone wolves, right? It's like, it's fine, I've got it, I've got it, I've got it, I've got it, I've got it. I can do it all. I can do
Mm.
it all. And it's like we're not designed to do it all. We're designed to collaborate. We're designed to be able to lean into each other. We're designed to get support and for our nervous systems to rest into each other and to receive the benefit of someone else's more co-regulated nervous system. And so this pattern of hyper self-reliance stops us from receiving that. And it keeps us stuck in this pattern of, I can't trust anyone. I have to do it all by myself. And I know in business that shows up as like, I see coaches, successful coaches who don't have any support. They don't have a VA. They don't have anyone else helping them. It's like, that's a recipe for burnout.
Mm. Yeah. hyper self-reliance. And it's so, um, what's the word? It's just put on a pedestal, especially here in the United States. I don't know if that's true where you are as well, that we have a medal of honor if we can figure out and show people that we've done it on our own. And in
Totally.
healing, to me, the absolute success for my own path is, can I let somebody in? Can I lean
Mm,
in? Can I be that vulnerable?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the same here in the UK. And, um, I work a lot with women, and, I feel that there's a kind of even more pressure there, to juggle like motherhood and work and, roles within the family home, and this sense of like, multitasking so much so, and having so much on our plates, and somehow that being some kind of like venerated way of being.
Yeah.
And I know that, you know, in women's bodies, the impact that that has on our hormones, because the nervous system and the hormonal system are, inextricably linked. And so when we operate from that place of, I've got it all, I can do it all, I don't need help, actually, it has a detrimental effect on our hormones. And I've gone through menopause. And what I saw on that journey, when I was going through perimenopause, which is when hormones start to shift and change, um, when we don't have that stability in the system anymore, then it affects the nervous system even more. And then that feeds back into the hormones, and we get into this mess. And what I saw is that so many women arrive at that very significant threshold of perimenopause already in a hot mess with their hormones, because they've been in these patterns of hyper self-reliance.
Yeah.
So it has this significant knock-on effect on every aspect of the way in which we experience ourselves and how we show up in life. I don't think menopause would be an issue that it is if we were to heal from patterns of hyper self-reliance.
Yeah. Which, when our nervous systems can become regulated, the hormones are regulated, we're more available for connection, we can rest into support.
Yeah,
So I love the simplicity of what happens when we work at a nervous system level through co-regulation, not
yeah,
through uh, all these practices of self-regulation and
yeah,
self-nervous system regulation. How do we do this in relationship?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I often kind of think about this image of like mice all huddled together in a nest, and they're all kind of, their breath is synced up. They're all kind of like resting into each other. And they're mammals, just like we are. And yet, for many of us, that idea of getting that close to that many other bodies is completely terrifying.
Yeah. What do you
And
make of
so,
that?
well, I mean, I think co regulation often needs to start with just one other person to begin with.
Mhm.
And then we can move to these kind of more group settings where we can experience co regulation in a bigger group and co regulate the group nervous system. But yeah, starting with, can I do this with one other person? And, we can co regulate online, and we can co regulate in person. Because often when I talk about co regulation with people, they're like, yeah, but I haven't got anyone to do this with.
Mm.
I live kind of on my own, or I live in an isolated place. And it's like, we can do this online, right? We can meet each other and connect, and we can hear the tone of voice, and allow that to shift something in us,
Mhm.
we can learn to kind of rest into the back of our body, for example, together, and find that grounded place of being together. And, I'm someone who loves touch, so I love doing things in person and like physically leaning into somebody and squishing bodies and um, going foot to foot with somebody or back to back with somebody, um, or spooning, with somebody. Last year, I trained as a belly to belly facilitator,
Mhm.
um, which is a beautiful co-regulation practice, very opening of the parasympathetic nervous system, and can take people into such profound states because there is just such an openness that happens. There's so much love in the room and
Mm.
expansion in the room, um, through that practice.
Can
But
you say a little bit about what that practice is for folks that don't know?
yeah, so it's a practice that was developed by David Cates, and he's a fellow American, beautiful being. And it's a practice to come into a relationship with another human being through the breath initially, and to sync up the breath with another being. And when we do that, we come into this like resonance with each other, and we begin to build safety with another. And we can do this like with one other person, but we can do it in a group of people. And then what's interesting is that we can sync up the breath with the whole room, and that creates quite a magical experience for us. But as we're lying there, like on our backs, just next to another person, breathing together, not touching, at some point there's an invitation to look at each other. And usually in that moment, people's hearts like burst open, and then there's tears. And I mean, it's a very slow practice. It's very slow. And then there may be an invitation to kind of get close and to have physical contact or not, depending on what feels safe in that moment. Um, and so it can look like a whole group of people who are all like snuggled up to another being, and their breaths are just syncing up together. The bodies are moving together like this. It's like this wave moving through the room. And it's like openness and trust and safety and connection is there beyond any words, because we're just allowing the body to kind of find its way. And when that happens slowly enough, with the right invitations and the right guidance, then we can find ourselves potentially with a complete stranger, someone we'd only met in that workshop, in that moment, and we feel such profound safety with them.
Mhm. It's pretty incredible.
Mm.
I have done this practice many times and introduced it to my partner recently. And I was so aware of how vulnerable it can be when we are dropping into these states of co regulation and connection
Yeah,
and intimacy. It sounds so good, right? It sounds like, oh, that sounds lovely. But it also takes a level of vulnerability.
yeah.
Yeah.
It takes a willingness to really meet ourselves. And so, what can happen as you're guiding belly to belly practice is that there'll be tears. Like, oh, wow, I never knew this was possible. Oh, wow, is this person really accepting me? They really want to be this close to me, or are they just doing it because this is the practice? So, all of those inner voices come up or can come up, and we get exposed. But if the intention is to hold this in love and tenderness, then all of that gets to be here and it gets to be held and it gets to be met and we get to be met in it. And that's a rewiring that can happen on a neurological level. It's like, oh, I get to be a messy human being and I still get to be in the presence of somebody else who may be touching or maybe not, but I get to be here with someone else who is choosing to be here with me in this moment, as I am choosing to be with them in this moment.
Mm. And I love that it's such a somatic, body-based experience. No
Yeah,
words.
yeah,
That co-regulation can happen on so many different levels, especially on the body level.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
You know, I'm somebody, I love to dance. I go to five rhythms classes and conscious dances regularly. And, you know, for me in that space, moving with other bodies is really co regulating. So I don't even need to have a particular connection with anybody, but there's like a connection with the group. There may be fleeting moments with people, but it's like I get to connect to myself whilst being here, whilst I get to be in movement. And that can be a really kind of safe way into co regulation.
Mm.
Because if it gets too much, it's like, oh, I can just keep moving my body. I keep dancing and I'm over there now. And, you know, it gets to still remain really safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of what we are moving towards, I think the hope is the exploration of, is it safe to be me? To let
Mm,
myself out, let this part out, let that part out.
yeah,
And with that level of vulnerability, as we begin to connect and co-regulate, we have to gauge how much is too much or too fast to let out as we're learning. Is it safe to be me? Is it safe to be authentic?
yeah.
And I think sometimes as we kind of get that, oh my goodness, can we really feel this good? Let's do more. Let's open up faster. Let's try this everywhere. There can be such an impulse to just kind of devour the healing, yet there can be a rubber band effect or a vulnerability hangover if we're not discerning and mindful about how we choose to let ourselves out. Does that sound resonant for you?
100%. I remember kind of back in my early days of kind of getting to know myself in through therapy and various groups and then kind of oversharing in spaces where there wasn't capacity to hold. And especially when I went on a deep dive into sexuality, you know, I'd be coming back, sharing things and looking at people's faces, and I'm like, oh my goodness, they just so didn't get that, you know, and they're looking at me like somewhat either perplexed or concerned. You
Mhm.
did what? Like, ooh, okay. And so, yeah, having to learn like, where are the spaces where I can reveal these parts of myself? And where are the spaces where I need to hang back in order to protect myself? Because otherwise, I'm going to meet shame, I'm going to meet judgment. So it's like learning about who are your people, who are your tribe, where do you belong? And knowing that not all of us belongs in every single situation. So I know that there are spaces where I can go and talk about kink and BDSM, it's totally fine. And other spaces where it's just like, that's gonna go down like a lead balloon. Like I'm just not gonna bring that because it's just not gonna be understood,
Yeah.
right? And other spaces where I can talk about psychedelic experiences that I've had. And I just know that, yeah, I won't be taking that to there, and there.
Mhm. Mm,
And, and I really know this place of wanting to be in my fullness everywhere. And the kind of sadness I
yeah.
experience when it's like, wow, I still have to kind of like temper myself in some way. I still have to hang back in some way. Like, come on, world, catch up.
Yeah. Mm, I'm so with you. There's a grief that goes along with that.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally, totally.
And there's something that happens when we widen our capacity and we become more regulated where we don't actually need to have every space meet us in our full expression. We don't need to have every person. And I think I thought that's what healing meant for a long time, that
Mm,
I'll be so confident and so expressed that no matter where I go and what I do and what I say and how I be, that the world will just love it, you know? And I found actually there's a more tender experience where I get to set boundaries for myself
mm,
of where I get to be this part and where I get to be that part. And no matter what happens, I'm with me. I'm held by something greater. I know where my healing spaces are. I know if that didn't feel good, I have someone to lean into. Right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I've recently been doing circling as a practice, and I love it. I really, really love it. And, obviously, the invitation is for authenticity and to be very present moment focused and to bring what is happening. And there's a lot of myself I can bring to that container. And I know there are still parts that are like, yep, even here.
Mhm. Yeah.
Even here.
Mm. I just felt kind of an ache in my heart as you said that. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
I have to imagine there are some people who are listening who are maybe thinking, well, that's great for you. You have this community over here and that one there. And like, how do I just find one experience of feeling a little bit safer in connection? You know, just how do I start to grow this discernment of this could be a safe place for me to let myself out and lean into co-regulation and build trust, and maybe this one isn't. Do you
Mm.
have any words of wisdom for anybody that's just like, I still don't know where my people are, or my healing practitioner? How do I find this beautiful thing that you're talking about?
I think it's about coming back to that developmental sequence. And the first step of that is knowing what your needs are. Because unless we know that, how are we going to guide our efforts towards what's going to serve us? So for me, I did a lot of work with these very early young parts of myself around what is it that I actually need? I sat with this for a long time.
Mm,
And then I wrote down the list of all the things that I didn't think I deserved and added those to the list of things that I needed. Um, and so then it was almost like, well, I've got this kind of list of the things that I need. And then I can begin to move out into the world and begin to kind of explore and kind of dip my toe into experiences, but whilst being really mindful of what it was that I needed. So I could be like, well, does this fit? Does this meet those needs? No, it doesn't. So this isn't it. And I find that the more I was able to do that, the more I could begin to trust myself and I could trust my no. Like, no, this isn't a right fit. And then I could tend to that part that was in urgency and desperation to find what it needed. And it had historically, like you described, kind of um, clung on to places that weren't healthy. So then it was more like, okay, well, that doesn't meet my needs. Well, let's try over here and dip a toe in here. I don't have to jump in at the deep end, but I'm going to dip a toe in here and see what that feels like. Oh, this meets a few more of those needs. So I can kind of hang around here for a little bit longer. And then in that place, we can begin to kind of start opening a little bit more when there's the safety to
Mm.
actually receive those needs on a deeper level.
Yeah.
So really, this is like a lot of toe dipping to begin with.
Yes. Titration, a
Hmm.
little by little by little, which is very hard for some folks that experience a lot of intensity from trauma. We think intensity is where the healing happens, right?
Yeah, totally. I'll go
Mm.
and do a 10-day ayahuasca, experience or a deep dive into sexuality,
Yeah.
um, and then wonder why I come out the other end completely fried.
Mm. We need to do an entire other podcast episode on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So important. Little by
Mm.
little, dip a toe in and doing the best we can to not gaslight ourselves when we think this is supposed to be healing for me, but something is not feeling right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think the beautiful thing is now that, one of the beautiful things about social media is that it doesn't take much to kind of find other people and other groups that exist in social platforms that may be places that we can dip a toe into. It's not like going back to the yellow pages and having like 5 therapists listed in your area. There are existing groups. There
Yeah.
are places where you can go and just kind of see, well, what's this place like here?
Mm.
You know? And for a lot of people, there are actual kind of live events that we can go to where we can also dip a toe in, and we don't have to kind of literally strip ourselves bare to engage. You can sit on the edge.
Well, speaking of possible experiences and people to connect with, I would love for you to share your offerings and what people might find when they come looking for you.
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah. Um, so one of my big passions is to support people who are um, coaches and therapists, facilitators, space holders, to become trauma informed. And what I mean by that is looking at um, trauma informedness. Don't know if that's a word, but I've just made it up as a way of being, and really kind of not just learning the skills to respond to somebody in the space when they're triggered or upset, but actually how to build out your facilitation, your therapy in a way that is deeply trauma informed all the way through. So I'm offering a training starting in February 2025. Got quite a few people signed up already for that, which is great. It's going to be online, so super accessible for people globally. Um, and then, my one-to-one work is more kind of create bringing people into a kind of like into a sacred space together to work on, you know, these places that need more holding, that need more care, that need to be more seen, that need to then be integrated so that more of you can be here and available to bring your gifts and your medicine through. Um, and I also really love working with in a kind of like mentorship role with people who are facilitators, practitioners, and I love kind of getting into that like nitty gritty of what's going on and why that happened in that workshop and why your client said this
Mhm.
and dealing with all of that. So yeah, that's another one of my passions is supporting uh, people to kind of yeah get the clarity and to get the deeper support, but not just kind of conceptual support, but real like nervous system support. I was on a call the other day and um, this theme of perfectionism was there, and it's been running through a number of calls I've been having recently. And it's like it's such a fascinating topic, how that shows up in our practice as coaches, therapists, facilitators, and how it can completely hijack us and prevent us from bringing forth our gifts.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's just an example of one of the things that I, yeah, love to get into with people.
Mhm. You also have a summit coming up.
I do. I do have a summit coming up. And yes, the beginning of December, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of December. And it's called Together We Rise, Building Resilient Futures. And so it really speaks into this idea of like, let's stop being lone wolves, trying to figure it all out by ourselves, and come into some sense of togetherness. And the summit's aimed particularly for people who are facilitating and holding space for others, but a lot of it would be really interesting for anyone who's on a healing journey. And I've interviewed incredible people, including yourself, on such a diverse range of topics from, embodied leadership to um, power dynamics to embodied inclusion to emergent facilitation to um, nervous system imprints and attunement and co-regulation. I mean, it's like we're covering like a really whole wide range of topics. Um, but yeah, each conversation has felt like it's brought so much gold,
Mhm.
so much gold. There's so much richness in each conversation. So yeah, that's going to be available really soon.
Mhm. Mm. Well, I can't wait for people to come find you. If
Mm.
y'all are wondering where to find Catherine, those links will be in the show notes. Do you want to speak your website out loud or how an easy way for people to find you?
Uh, well, I think it's probably if anyone's got a memory like mine, then it's probably best to kind of like have it written down. But if you've got a super good memory, it's catherinehale.co.uk,
Perfect.
and you'll find me there. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you so much for giving of your time and your heart and your wisdom, your story. And
Mm.
I am so looking forward to whatever happens next. I'd love to keep chatting, and I just hope everyone comes and finds you and your beautiful work.
Mm. Well, thank you, Shelby, for this conversation. It's been a real gift. I've really enjoyed your questions and the doorways that's opened up, and I'm just trusting that whoever needs to hear this is able to receive this and can course correct to slightly more co-regulation in their lives.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
Mm.